Well, hello everyone. This is Jeanette from the Babies in Common show.
And I'm Melissa. Welcome, listeners. As a reminder, any information shared during the show is not to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own care providers for questions about you or your baby's health, and visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer to read more.
All right, so today is December 23rd, 2020, and it was, 8 years ago?
8 years ago.
Today that you were in labor with your oldest child.
That's right.
So we thought it would be fun to talk about your Christmas baby on Christmas.
That is true. My very surprise Christmas baby.
Woohoo!
I'm so glad we decided to do this.
I know, it's fun to share because I know we always encourage everybody else to share their stories, but we don't always share ours. And I shared mine, so now it's your turn. And you've got 3, so different. True. I only have 2. Not only, they're fabulous, but so what's your story? So on December 23rd, you're ready to have your first baby. And where were you planning on giving birth? You had years of being a labor and delivery postpartum nurse. Like, you had lots of experience in education. You were a childbirth educator, and here you've got like everything at your fingertips, basically.
Sure.
You know, we're in Massachusetts. There's a lot of options. And so how did you go about choosing where you're going to give birth, with whom, you know, doula, partner, who else was at your birth? Like, who did you choose for providers, locations? So what went into that thought process and decisions?
Totally. So you're right. I was a labor and delivery nurse. I started being a labor and delivery nurse in 2007. So I've been a labor and delivery nurse for about 5 years. And a year into my labor and delivery nurse career, I saw the documentary, The Business of Being Born, which I highly recommend. It's a classic.
That is like major homework for anybody that takes your classes. They have to go and find that. And there's a link on our website on babiesincommon.com under resources. There's a link for videos, and there is a way that you can get to the Business of Being Born easily through there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually talked a little bit about this when I interviewed for Rebecca Decker's podcast at Evidence-Based Birth. But it was eye-opening to me because before seeing that movie, as I've described in the past, I was what I would consider the star pupil for the medical model of maternity care. I was working at a high-risk hospital. We had a lot of quote emergencies, which, spoiler alert, were oftentimes caused by us over intervening in normal, healthy births. And, I just thought that we were like saving women and babies from, these emergency situations. And when I saw The Business of Being Born, and I realized, you could have taken my hospital and plopped it in that movie. It was so strikingly similar. The way the residents would go down the board of patients and, check everybody every 2 hours and put everybody on Pitocin. And it was that is exactly where I was working in a big academic medical center. And I was like, wow, okay. So this transformed my entire paradigm philosophy on labor and birth, from being that labor and birth are inherently dangerous and need to be actively managed to keep mom and baby from dire, straits, to the maternity model of care, or the physiological model of care, which is that labor and birth are inherently a normal, healthy human body process that, when supported physically and emotionally, most people that have healthy low-risk pregnancies are going to go on to deliver healthy babies and have healthy outcomes. So, the 5 years prior to me getting pregnant, I was very much wrapped up in consuming anything and everything related to physiological birth. I read Pam England's Birthing from Within. Highly recommend that. I read everything Penny Simkin wrote. The Birth Partner. You name it.
You went to conferences.
I went to conferences. I was consuming, not only to provide evidence-based supportive labor and delivery nurse care, but because I really wanted to get pregnant myself. Well, there's always something that's going to go wrong in your fertility, pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum parenting or breastfeeding experience. In my experience, nobody has it 100% perfect. You might have a friend who had that, amazingly healthy pregnancy and killer birth experience, who has inverted nipples and a tongue-tied baby. Something's going to happen. And so for me, it was infertility, a shockingly unexpected diagnosis of infertility, which I will not get into a great detail, but that really threw me for a loop at 27 to be told that I might possibly not be able to get pregnant and keep a pregnancy. I had 3 miscarriages. I did end up getting pregnant, luckily, when I got pregnant when I was 29. I was going to be turning 30 that next year. And I was very grateful to have a healthy pregnancy. So before I got pregnant, when I was still working for that high risk hospital and we were kind of toying around with the idea of getting pregnant, but not kind of actively trying, I had contacted a home birth midwife in the Ithaca area. I was living in Syracuse at the time, and, talked to her about if she would come up to Syracuse to do a home birth for me. And because, I did a lot of research on home birth after, watching the business of being born. But by the time I ended up getting pregnant, since it took me long and I had this infertility journey, I was living in Massachusetts. My husband and I graduated, we moved back to Massachusetts. And at the time I was working for a wonderful hospital in the Boston area that has a large autonomous midwifery practice. And I was working alongside these midwives providing compassionate evidence-based maternity care at a hospital that had like a 50% unmedicated birth rate with OBs that were amazing. And so I was like, I didn't really feel like I needed to have a home birth, although there is still, it was still a hospital birth. I just felt like very supported by the midwives that I was working with. And so I decided to get care with a couple of the midwives that I was working with, which was wonderful.
Which is, not super common. Like a lot of people are like, well, I love all the people I work with, but I'm not going to let them be my care providers. I'm going to go somewhere else,
so
right?
Weird to me. Yeah. A lot of people say that, like, oh my God, you're not going to give birth with the people you work with, are you? I mean, like, they're going to see you naked. I was like, nobody's going to remember what my vagina looks like, but I want to know if someone's cutting into my body, if they know how to sew it back up. Right. Like that's
it's like it's a great privilege to be able to know who the people are.
I was like, I'm going to be able to hand pick any nurse and doctor and midwife that I want to touch my body. Like to me, like this idea of people seeing my boobs was like not an issue.
Well, you're also not the most private person. So
I wouldn't say that. I'm not the most modest person.
Right.
So, but I was just like, no, even if I was modest, I felt like knowing the skill set of the people taking care of me was invaluable. And so, plus they gave wonderful care. So I saw a midwife. It was wonderful. And I was really lucky that the midwife that I had when I was pregnant, her name is Lila. She's a good friend of mine now, but she was also pregnant with her first baby at the same time. And our due dates were 2 days apart. So she would, I would go into the appointments and she'd be like, how are you feeling today? I was like, it feels like my pelvic floor is so stretched that if I can't push my pee out, like I just have to let it fall out of my body. And she was like, me too. So it was like awesome to like bond with her in that way.
And also keeping in mind that this is a hospital that was about an hour away from your house.
Oh yeah. And so at the time it was convenient, so to speak, to have the providers that I was working with be giving care to me, because, when I didn't really have a lot of questions at my appointments because I was talking to them while I was working, but I worked either 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so I couldn't like schedule my prenatal appointments when I was already in the Boston area. I actually had to drive out there for my appointments, and I live in the Worcester area. So it would take me an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half to like get to these appointments, depending on when they were during the day. And so, but I didn't have kids. And so I would just, I would go to my appointment and then I would go get lunch by myself in Harvard Square, and I would go shopping at the Galleria Mall.
Those were the days.
Yeah, it was great. So I made a day of it every time I had to go out for an appointment. And so it was not a big deal to me to get care an hour away. I knew the care I was going to get was wonderful. And so it was worth it to me to make that drive. So I was still teaching and working. I worked up until I was 32 weeks pregnant on labor and delivery. I taught childbirth class until I was 36 weeks. So when people like, oh, they don't want to get up out of the chair in childbirth class, I'm like, listen, you need to move. But I wasn't due until January 4th. And the other joke I make in childbirth class all the time is that if you want to predict with a great level of certainty, in my opinion, when that baby of yours is actually going to be born, I want you to think about that one date in the whole world that you don't want the baby to be born on. And then that's going to be the day the baby's born. Like, what is it? Is it your mother-in-law's birthday? Is it the one day at work that you can't miss before you go out on maternity leave? Is it the, whatever? Because for me, that one day was Christmas Day. people would say, oh my God, what if you have a baby on Christmas? Oh my God, what if you have a Christmas baby? And I was like, listen, most first-time moms go late. And I had left labor and delivery at 32 weeks to take an office job with a doctor practice that delivered at the hospital that I was planning on delivering at. And I took the job, like, of course, taking a new job at 32 weeks pregnant, like, not that people should be upset that you're pregnant, you're going to go on maternity leave, but it's kind of a drag to like hire somebody new. And then in 8 weeks, they're going to be gone for 3 months. And so I had taken this job and promised them that I would work on Christmas Eve, which is so funny because they of all people should know that you can't predict when you're going to have the baby. But I had really convinced the nurse manager that I was not going to have this baby till like January 18th. Like I just like, when I remember her asking me once, like, oh, so when should I hire your, the per diem nurse to come in so she can shadow you? I'm like, not till January, wait till after the holidays. Like why she believed me, I will never know. But I was convinced that I was not going to have the baby till after Christmas because most first-time moms go 7 to 12 days after their due date. So
back up a second, though. So you had the midwives at the hospital you were working at, and so you already could handpick your nurse. You knew who all the midwives were. You already knew them really well. So and you're a labor and delivery nurse yourself. What makes you decide to hire a doula, and how did that roll out?
Oh, Jeanette, how could I forget to talk about you? So funny story. Years before, probably 3 years. 2 or 3 years before I got pregnant, when we moved back to Massachusetts, we were living close to where your original Mothers and Company, rest in peace, business extraordinaire was, which is, predates Babies in Common, but what used to childbirth classes, you had a shop, and it was a wonderful place, Shangri-La. But so I had stumbled upon it, not pregnant, just because I saw
driving by, weren't you?
I was just driving by looking for a candy store. Actually,
my
husband said, I remember there used to be a candy store around here, and our apartment was close to there. And so I saw an ad for breast pumps in the window, and being the weirdo labor and delivery nurse, like lover of all things boobs and breasts and bellies, I was like, pull over. I want to see what that breast pump place is. And anyway, we met at your shop, and I had attended a few birth circles, and you had some events, like you had a nurse in once, I remember, where everybody like latched on at the same time. And so I went to some events and made friends with, some home birth midwives and doulas in the area, and you. And then while working on labor and delivery, at the time when I just had found out that I was pregnant and that this was a viable pregnancy, which was incredible because after 3 miscarriages, I was holding my breath. We attended a birth together. You were the doula and I was the nurse. And I just remember, like you talked about the cosmos during your birth experience. That to me was the cosmos saying, Jeanette has to be your doula. And I wheeled her to postpartum, and I gave you a hug goodbye after this like hard birth that we both attended that, had a really great outcome.
There's a part of the story that I like to share too.
Okay.
So this is a couple that really wanted an unmedicated birth. I still remember their names. I won't say them here, of course. And we'd been laboring at home. We get to the hospital. She really wanted to go all natural. Her partner was really on board, like would totally like catch the baby too if he could. We walk in the doors and I see you standing at the desk, and I was like, Melissa, and you're like, Jeanette, and I'm like, are you our nurse? And she's like, I am. And I'm like, oh my God, we have just scored, right? Because you had such a reputation of like being such a fan of natural childbirth and really, supportive. So, and there was one point in the birth where she really didn't want epidural, but she kind of wanted to know the story about it.
She was like 9 centimeters. I remember her being really far
just tell me about the epidural. I'm not sure I really want it, but just tell me all about it. And you were sitting a little bit behind me. And so it was like you behind me a little bit, and then me, and then her. And so I sort of like leaned over so she could really see you better. And you're like, okay, so you can get an epidural, but if you need the epidural, it's going to require this, and we're going to have to do this, and we're going to have to do this, and da-da-da, and it's going to take some time, da-da-da, and I think you're doing well. I don't think you need it, but this is what would happen. And I remember she was like, okay, fine, I won't do it. I turned around to you and I mouthed, I love you. Because the way you said it was just so magical. And so then, like, she has her unmedicated, beautiful, fantastic birth, and you use the birth stool for part of it. And then she ends up going to like the luxury room for
Yes,
celebrities
yes,
at your
yes.
hospital. It had like a fireplace in the wall and like granite sink top, and it was like
Mm-hmm.
beautiful wooden room and a TV for the partner in his section. You know, it was so nice. And then you're hugging me goodbye, and you whisper in my ear, "What are you doing in January?" And I was like, "Nothing. Why?" She's like, "Will you be my doula?" And I was like, "Oh my God." Yes.
That's so true.
So
Yeah,
that was
I did.
exciting.
I just felt like this is a sign. I just found out this is a viable pregnancy, and I'm like 8 weeks along at this point, and I'm like, you were like the first person other than like my husband that knew I was pregnant. I was like, I just have to have you because, you know, this is perfect. And it was not that you didn't attend births out in the Boston area, but you're also from Central Mass, and so it was
Mm.
unusual that like we would run into each other in that
Well,
way. So
I
I
went
just
to
felt
another
like,
hospital more often
yeah,
because I was still
I just
teaching at that other hospital. But yeah, I didn't go to your hospital very often.
just felt like it was kismet.
Mm.
It was the cosmos. So where was I? Okay, December 23rd, 2012. I was having a Christmas party at my parents' house, and I remember it's all in hindsight. You're like, oh my
Mm.
God, this makes total sense. You know, that was a Sunday, and the Friday before that, so December 21st, I was at a Christmas concert. Straight No Chaser, highly recommended. And I was so uncomfortable. I couldn't sit. I was cramping. I kept timing the cramps after a while because they just kept happening. Like I kept feeling this feeling like, didn't I just have one of these cramps? And so after a while, I was like, I guess I should time them. They were coming 8 minutes apart. And I was like, oh man.
Wait,
So
this is on the 21st.
on the 21st, and
Okay.
I was at this Christmas concert, and then they ended up going away. And then the 22nd, we're at the Home Depot, and my sister-in-law calls me. She had just had her third baby on Thanksgiving. And so she was like, how you feeling? I was like, just I'm feeling crampy and heavy and irritated. And she's like, yep. I'm like, maybe this is labor. I was contracting last night. I'm contracting again. They're like every 8 minutes. She's like, if you think it's labor, you're not sure it's labor. It's not labor. And I was like, okay. She's like, it's going to be markedly different. She's like, it's just going to be markedly different. I'm like, okay. And those 2 nights, I woke up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, starving, more starving than I'd ever been. I ate a bowl of oatmeal, like instant oatmeal, and
You're
I had
starving, and that's
diarrhea.
what you go for is
Yeah,
oatmeal.
I don't know.
Jeez.
I'd have a bowl of oatmeal and then I'd have diarrhea. Like it
Oh
was like I'd
gosh.
wake up
Yeah.
and of course, in hindsight, it's like dumb, you're going into labor. Like you're a labor and delivery nurse. This is pre-labor.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'd have a bowl of oatmeal and diarrhea, and then I'd go back to bed and wake up in the morning, and I wouldn't have been in labor. So the 23rd, I am extra irritable. I couldn't sit. I couldn't stand. I was just heavy, and I just felt so much pressure. The Braxton Hicks, which I had been having Braxton Hicks since 24 weeks, like
Which I always like to call
regularly.
practice contractions.
Practice
They're named
contractions,
after a
practice
man. We
contractions.
don't need to do that. We'll call them
True,
practice.
that's true. But yeah, I just was, oh man, I was not in the Christmas spirit. And what's funny is you said at the beginning of the podcast, you're like, so it's December 23rd, 2012, and you're all ready to have your baby. That's what's funny is I was not. I, again, remember, was not going to have my baby till January 18th. This is what I was telling myself.
That's right.
So I was going to have the Christmas party on the 23rd, and then I was going to work on Monday, the 24th.
Right.
And we were going to have Christmas. And then after Christmas, I had a week off where I was going to make all those crock pot meals, and I was going to pack my labor bag, and I was going to go through all the materials that you had sent me because I took childbirth classes with you, and you were my doula, and you came over and did a home visit with me to tell me all the different places I could labor in my home. And I was going to get all that shit done after Christmas. Murphy's Law. Because I did not in any shape or form expect to go into labor early. So 23rd, I am irritable. I am not in the Christmas spirit. That night, I'm contracting now like every 10 to 12 minutes, and they feel different. But they weren't strong enough for me to like have to stop and breathe. I could still kind of scurry around the house. And Paul, though, was like, you are just acting different. You should call Jeanette. And I was like, no. She's going to, it's not labor. She'll laugh at me. I'll be embarrassed if it's not. He's like, just call her. And what's funny is I remember when I asked you, what are you doing in January? And you're like, and I hired you as my doula. We had our first meeting. One thing, and it's so silly what you're nervous about, like when you're pregnant, like the things that you think are such a big deal. One thing that I thought was such a big deal was I was so worried if I went into labor on Christmas that you would miss Christmas with your family. And like, this was just like a big deal to me. And so I remember saying like, I feel really bad hiring you. Like, what if I do have a baby on Christmas? And you're like, well, don't worry, my husband's Jewish. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
like, I remember that. And it's funny is that brought me so much peace of mind. Like, I was like, oh, thank God they're Jewish. Like, at least
there's
he's
still
not
a little Christmas
her
tree and there's a couple gifts, but it's not a big deal.
Exactly. And so I was like, oh my God, it's so funny. Like, that was a big deal to me. Like, I didn't want you to be upset if I went into labor on Christmas. Like, you would, it's a baby, that they come when they come. But so he was like, just tell Jeanette she needs to, like, maybe she'll go to bed earlier tonight, like, you give her a heads up. And I'm like, okay. So I text you like, hey, I'm having some cramps. Paul's making me text you. And you were like, okay, cool, maybe take a bath or whatnot, thanks for the heads up. And so Paul's like, maybe you should pack your labor bag. And I was like, okay. So I packed my labor bag. You had told me to take a shower. So I took a shower. I was still pretty crampy and uncomfortable, but eventually the contractions probably faded away by 11 o'clock at night or so when I fell asleep. But then around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with something that felt markedly different, as my sister-in-law would say. It was more not just tightening, it was more down low menstrual, like having like that warm burning diarrhea feeling, and then it would wrap up around my whole belly, and then I would fall asleep, and then I would wake up again, and then I would fall asleep, and then I wake up again and I would fall asleep. And it happened enough that I finally started like opening an eyeball when it would happen, and I'd look at the clock and then I'd doze off again. And it turned out that they were coming about every 12 minutes. Whenever I'd open my eyeball, it was like another 12 minutes had gone by. But I knew, being a childbirth educator, that the best thing to do is to try to go back to sleep. And so I'm proud of myself for following that advice. I didn't wake up Paul until about 6.
You didn't write it down. You didn't have an app that
exactly.
you just had to
no,
write it
I
into.
just,
like, no.
I just tried to go back to bed. But then around 6:30, like, because I worked so far away, I had to get up to get ready for work. I had to be there pretty early. And so, but by that point, I was so uncomfortable that I did not feel that I could safely drive. They were still coming only about every 10 to 12 minutes, but they were enough that I had to breathe through them. Like, they took my attention.
You might have to call your boss and be like, I know I promised to work today.
Well, so I wake up Paul. No, I didn't need to do that. I woke up Paul and I was like, hey, can you drive me to work? And he's like, what? He's like, drive you to work? Why? I mean, yeah, but like, why? And I was like, okay, I'm not in labor, but I'm just having these sensations. They're painful enough that I don't feel like I could safely drive. And as I'm saying it now, like, oh my God, you're such a fool. But like, he's looking at me with this horrified look on his face, like, you're having contractions? And I was like, yeah. But I'm not in labor because I'm not having the baby until January. So, but I need you to drive me to work because I promised them that I would go to work. And as I'm talking, like, again, the power of denial, right? Like, I am contracting and I am swaying and breathing and I'm trying to convince him to drive me to work. So he's like, if you call the midwife and she says you can go to work, then I'll bring you to work. But otherwise, I am not getting in a car with you. Like, so I was like, oh, fine. So I called the midwife, happened to be Ariana. And she was like, yeah, Melissa, you need to stay home today. Like, worst case scenario, this is, practice labor and it goes away. And then you get a day off to rest before your entire life changes upside down. And I was like, okay, when you put it like that, you're right. So I did. I had to call my boss and be like, I'm having contractions, but it might not be labor, but the midwife said I can't go and she's going to send you a letter. And I'm so sorry. And I was it's so silly. Like, she was a obstetrical nurse practitioner. And I was like, I promise I will come in the day after Christmas instead. Like, and so she's like, okay, Melissa, I just hope you feel better, keep me posted. So then I ended up going downstairs at that point, kind of walking around, petting the dog, just kind of, Paul drew me a bath. You had, I think we had called you at that point. You recommended a bath. So he drew me a bath. I soaked in the tub for a while. When I came out, he had eggs and toast for me, which was wonderful. I remember that. So I had some eggs and toast. And then then I fell asleep. I felt so good after the nap and the food that I fell asleep probably till, after noonish, like 12 noonish. And then I remember we walked the dog around the neighborhood. It was cold, but it was sunny. And my mom lived across the street at the time. So we went over and had some Christmas cookies and I labored leaning over her kitchen island we ended up coming back and we put on a funny movie, Anchorman, which is like one of my literal favorites. And I would, I was still laughing at the jokes at that point, and I was kneeling over the yoga ball. I remember doing a lot of kneeling on the floor and leaning over the couch cushions, like the seat of the couch, or standing up behind my recliner and leaning over the back of
I
the
use the ball
recliner.
a lot too. You just reminded me of that. Yeah.
I um I was having, at that point, it was starting to get more intense in my back. And so it felt really good to lean forward and hang my belly forward. And then I remember around like 5 o'clock-ish, I was getting hungry again. I had been sneaky snacking throughout the day. Paul was good about making sure I was drinking. And so we decided to get some takeout. And I was just like, I want something bland, like rice and like just like plain vegetables, like something like steamed vegetables from like a Chinese restaurant. Like I didn't want any sauce on it. And he's like, okay. So the contractions, I know, were 9 minutes apart by that point, because the Thai food place that he Googled to find some place that was less than 9 minutes away. And so, because I didn't want him to leave me, I wanted to go. So we, I had a contraction, hopped in the car, drove to the Thai food place, got out of the car, had another contraction. It was perfectly timed. He goes and gets the food. He comes back out. I have another contraction. Wow. We hop in the car, drive back home. I get out of the car, have another contraction. It was perfect. But by the time we got the food, got back upstairs, at this point now, I'm like, I don't want to eat. Like my appetite was gone.
Through all that
like,
effort.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, nope, get that food away from me. And so poor Paul, he's starving, but he's like, well, but now I need him like touching my back, like the hip squeezes you showed us in class, and counter pressure with his thumbs in my lower back. And I am moaning. I am vocalizing. I am loud, right? Like I am mooing, right? And I'm sitting on the ball trying to put some rice in my mouth. But every time I go to put some rice in my mouth, like I just have another contraction. And I remember I'm laying my head on, I'm sitting on the ball, I'm laying over the dining room table, and I open my eyes and I look at Paul and I'm like, baby, I think I'm in labor. And he goes, I am mooing at the table, right? He goes, no shit, you're in labor. You've been in labor since 6 o'clock this morning. Like it's 6 o'clock at night at this point, right? So I've been contracting since, pretty consistently labor contractions since like 2 o'clock in the morning. And so he's like, I was like, maybe you should call the midwife. So things are getting more intense. I call the midwife, and she's like, I'm expecting, here's the childbirth educator in me, like, okay, maybe it's time to go to the hospital now. Like things are getting really intense. And Jen was her name. And she goes, you know what? I actually think that I know you don't want an epidural, so it doesn't sound like you need to come in. And I was like, what? Like, wait a second. What? And she's like, no, like you have plenty of time. I'm like, but I live in Central Mass. Like I have to drive all the way to Boston. She's like, oh, no, you have plenty of time. I know that I do. Like the logical side. But so I was like, okay. And I'm really glad because spoiler alert, like this is 6 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve. I didn't have the baby until 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day. Right. So it was absolutely too early, but that's where I would say was the beginning of my active labor. So she recommended that I call my mom, because I was planning on having her and you. And I think I texted you and I was like, I'm having my mom come over. You don't need to come yet. The midwife doesn't think that you need to come over. And so my mom came over, and that gave Paul a chance to eat. That's one thing that's nice about having a birth team of supportive, helpful people that because he had, been with me all day. And she was timing contractions for me, and I really wanted someone to count for me during contractions, meaning like I wanted them to count my breaths. So if I was 1, 2, because it was like my strategy where I knew by the time I got to like 14 or 15, and it was an arbitrary number, but the contraction was going to start to feel better. So like I just needed to get to the next breath and the next breath and the next breath. So that was just something that like worked for me. And so she would count for me and rub my back. And then at some point, probably, I don't think we ended up calling her over till like 10 o'clock at night. By 11 o'clock at night, I was like, yeah, I need to call in the big guns. Like, you got to get Jeanette here. And so you came over and you had recommended that we get in the tub again. So Paula started filling up the bathtub, and there's one vivid memory I have of at this point. So I'm in the tub again. And earlier in the day, I was relaxing in the tub, like leaning back. At this point, I am on my hands and knees in the tub. I am kneeling over the lip of the tub on my knees. I am moaning. I am shaking. I am having rectal pressure. I am feeling like I am in transition. And what's funny is Paul says, this is my husband, he says, I started to shit my pants at that point. Because you were like moaning and shaking and saying, I can't do this anymore. And, I really thought the baby was coming out in the bathtub. And I would look at your mom and she was like pouring water over your back with a cup and just like saying, you good job, sweetie, good job. And he's like, Jeanette was like rubbing your hair and like rubbing your shoulders and just like talking you through the contractions. You can do this. Everything's normal. You're all right. And he's like, I looked at them and they were not worried at all. They thought like it was as if this was totally normal to them. And what's funny is that's one of the benefits of having a doula is that, you do know that that was normal. And so he's like, it really made me feel better to know
because
that, like,
also he had not only done plenty of childbirth education, he's watched some films, and he's heard you talk about birth for all these years.
Oh yeah.
So he's
Absolutely.
a little bit more knowledgeable than your typical first-time partner to be, co-parent to be, whatever, dad to be. And still, there's those moments where you're just like, oh, is this normal? Oh no, what's going to happen? And so having those people that can be like, yeah, this is cool. And I kind of remember, because you said rectal pressure, like going through the thought of like, okay, so if this really is the time, so we're gonna have an accidental home birth. That'll be exciting.
I remember you saying that. Actually, that's actually when I started to get a little bit nervous, because I remember
I was like, I'm not gonna freak out. Like, this will be fine. We'll call.
No, you were totally calm, cool, and collected.
We can catch this baby, not a problem.
But so I get on the toilet and I'm feeling like I have to bear down at this point, and I'm shaking and I am feeling nauseous, and I am having all these signs of transition. Spoiler alert, I was in transition, but because my baby was crooked, my cervix was stuck at only 4 centimeters dilated. So, but I didn't, my body, we joke sometimes in birth, like your cervix has to catch up to your labor. Like my body was trying very hard to get my baby's head to turn. And so I was in transition, but my cervix was not advancedly dilated. So I remember at one point you said, well, I can call my home birth midwife if I need to. And I was like, no, I'm not planning that. Nothing's ready. I didn't clean. That's what I thought in my head. I thought like I didn't clean the house, because remember I was going to clean the house after Christmas. So I'm thinking like, no, we can't have a home birth because I didn't clean. Silly me. But anyway, at that point, as I'm shaking and feeling nauseous and saying I can't do this anymore and mooing, and we called the midwife again. At this point, of course, I remember Paul was outside of the bathroom. You and my mom are in the bathroom, really coaching me through. And he was like, yeah, she's just, I don't know. Like, I really feel like he couldn't even form words. Like he was just, and she was like, I heard her go, okay, well, why don't you bring her in? Which is
she can also hear you in the background.
Right. So different than the last time, we had called, where I was like talking to her on the phone. So people say, how do you know if someone's in labor without a vaginal exam? That's when the dad or the partner is like, I don't know.
Or the person in labor is on the phone and they're like, no, they're really coming close together. And then like they like hold the phone away, and then they're like, oh,
you're like, oh yeah. Okay. I hear that now. So I remember it was great to have you and my mom there, because Paul went outside to pack the car. And again, I didn't want to be left alone. I just felt like there's some people who want to be left alone. They just want their privacy. And I wanted privacy. Everything was dark. You guys were really good about keeping big lights off. At one point I was just laboring to the lights of the Christmas tree. At another point, just the light in the shower you turned on all the other lights off. I wanted that feeling of darkness and privacy, but I didn't want to be left alone. And because this is crazy what's going on in your body. And so Paul went out, and we had an SUV at the time, and he just piled so many blankets and pillows in the SUV in the back seat, because I was like, I wanted somewhere comfortable. I knew I wasn't going to be able to sit in the car. And again, I can't tell anybody that they, are allowed to drive without a seatbelt on the way to the hospital. But
you're not allowed to allow them anyway. But yes, legally, they're supposed to be buckled in safely.
In the interest of full disclosure, I was not buckled. What I would do is, when the contraction came, I would kneel on the back seat over Paul's chair as the driver's seat. I did have enough wherewithal to not grab his neck or shoulders, which I wanted to. I wanted to grab his body.
That's interesting, because a lot of people lean over the back.
Nope. I don't know why. Maybe the dog gate was there. I feel like that might have been it. I think there was a dog gate, so the dog couldn't jump into the back seat. And so I would lean over and I would push my head into the headrest
Headrest.
of his seat. My mom was in the passenger side. You drove in your own car behind us, and she would turn around and she was still counting for me, counting my breaths. That was something I really needed. And then of course I start puking. So I'm puking my
And
brains
this is a
out.
long ride, and I'm
Oh
driving
yeah.
going, is this baby coming out in the car?
Right.
Because you had rectal pressure. We didn't know what was
Oh yeah.
happening.
I'm
Like,
feeling
you just
pushy.
seemed like, and you get there, and I remember driving, and it's so funny what we remember of different births, but like the parking lot was empty,
Yes.
and we're like trying to find the right door, and I'm following you, and then they're like, oh, this
Like
door will take
one
this
or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I do remember one thing. It's funny, like you said, what you remember. I remember the sound of the tires on the road because it was so dark and quiet and Christmas Day. Right now it's 2 o'clock in the morning, Christmas Day. There's no traffic on the road. And I could just hear that just like rubber on the road tire. And it was so soothing. The vibration of the car under me was soothing. But then the contraction would come and I'd have to get up, right? But I would flop on all these pillows and blankets on my side in between. And I would just listen to the hum of the tires on the road. And then we get there. And of course, I'm puking, right? So puking in this bag. My mom gives me, thank God we had that. Kudos to Paul for remembering a puke bag. And of course, we park in the wrong parking lot because I'm just not even thinking. I'm parking in the employee parking lot because I work there. But
that's what it was.
God.
Yeah.
So we like have to walk around the whole building.
And then I'm like rolling the window down, and Paul's like, "Oh, we can't park here." I'm like, "Okay," and then we have to go somewhere else.
We're like walking through this empty lobby, and I had to keep stopping and like leaning over Paul or a chair or you, and you're doing hip squeeze on me. I remember I needed that hip squeeze counter pressure. And then at one point, I remember again I remember as I'm walking, I realize I'm holding a bag of my own vomit. Like and I remember saying, "Why am I holding this vomit?" So I'm like, "Somebody get me a trash can." Like I was like, "Why am I?" But the mom and me, like as I get out of the car, that wasn't even a mom
grab
yet,
the trash.
I just and I tie off my vomit and I carry it out the car, like
so
because
funny.
people don't realize, like even in the throes of labor, like in between contractions, you might be kind of in la la land, but like you can still talk, like you can still move, like people, I wasn't wheeled in a wheelchair, like I was walking in between. I was slow and I was, but so we get to labor and delivery, and they knew I was coming, obviously, because I'd called, and my favorite nurse friend was on, and she looks at me and and she's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I just gave her like this stink eye, like, and she's like, "Oh, okay, so we'll just bring you right into the room." Like they didn't even send me to triage, like I just like, I had to look. So get in a room. I asked for a room with a tub, which I always recommend, telling the doctor or the midwife on the phone before you even get in the car to go to the hospital to, if you're interested in water therapy and the hospital you're going to has it, to say, "Can I have a tub room?" So that they can kind of arrange that before you even step foot on the floor. Let them know about your birth plan, like before you come in. And so I got the room with one of the big, deep soaking tubs and got in the tub again. At this point, I remember my back pain was like completely unbelievable. Like it felt like somebody was taking my pelvis and crunching, like cracking it open. And it felt like, how you said when your tailbone broke, and that was a couple episodes ago, but like it felt like there was like cement coming out of your body, like a cement brick. Like it felt like someone was grinding my sacrum like in a pepper grinder. Like that's what it felt like. And it felt like someone was and again, I'm being honest here. Like it felt
the
like
stuff that
goes
through your head when you're feeling the pain, you envision something sometimes.
Right. I felt like something was wrong. This wasn't what most people described to me as the pain of labor. I could feel the contraction, and that was hard, but the back pain was worse.
Right.
It was consuming all of my attention. It was hard is that I was having this premature, uncontrollable urge to bear down. I felt like I was going to poop my pants with every contraction. And that, in hindsight, right, is not normal. People do not generally get rectal pressure until they are very close to pushing or ready to push. But I was having this, it was like telling my body not to have diarrhea. Like, and so I was like clenching my muscles almost to prevent myself from pooping, even though I wasn't pooping. It was the baby's head pushing on the nerves of my rectum before I was 10 centimeters dilated, because I had a baby that was what's called OT, occiput transverse. So he was looking sunny side up towards my right hip. And so he was kind of impacted diagonally in my pelvis. And it was causing me to have this uncontrollable urge to bear down. When they checked my cervix, again, we're thinking, right? Like, I'm going to have this baby. I was only 4 centimeters. So that was pretty defeating. I remember feeling like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I thought you were going to tell me I'm 8. Like,
I know.
and so at that point, our focus shifted to not just getting me to be comfortable, but trying to get me to stop pushing. Because what can happen when you have an uncontrollable urge to push before it's time, which again, this is not the common, not normal, is that your cervix can start to swell like a fat lip, like if you get punched in the face. And so I remember at this point, you had to give me a pep talk. Like, you were like, I want you to like put your face in the bed and stick your butt in the air. And I was like, no, that hurts. And you're like, well, we have to kind of shift from doing things to make you feel better to doing things to make the baby turn, right? Like that, because the midwife had said, oh, your baby's OT. And I was like, oh my gosh. So like that was a pretty big shift. I had to be like, okay, we're not just trying to help me cope with the contractions anymore. We're going to have to do some positions that might hurt more, but it's going to maybe help the baby turn. So I tried my best. I mean, we did lunges, we did rebozo booty shaking with my shake the apples bun in the air. I was doing everything but hanging by my ankles.
And this is 8 years ago when people didn't know all the cool spinning babies things now.
Yeah, true.
You know, so some of the spinning babies techniques that I know now, we didn't know those then, and the midwives didn't know those. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember at this point, the tub was unbearable. That being in the tub was absolutely unbearable, which is funny because I labored almost exclusively in the water when I had my home birth with Marceline, because it wasn't the contractions that were requiring all of my attention. It was this bone crunching feeling in my back. And again, that's not normal labor, that's back labor. And so I tried everything. And
didn't they do sterile water injections too?
I don't remember if they did sterile water injections.
May
have. I mean, I know that they do them there.
I think I like to. I was known at the other hospital as like the doula that always gets the midwives to learn how to do that technique. So like,
it's a great technique.
I probably
sometimes it doesn't work, but
I think we did. I feel like we tried it with you. The midwives administered that.
Possibly.
It didn't help a whole lot for you.
No, I remember nothing worked. Nothing helped. Nothing. I felt like I was going to crap my pants and that my bones were cracking, even though they weren't. I want to be very clear that unlike your bones, my bones were not cracking.
Right.
That's just what it felt like. And so they checked me at another point. I was 6 centimeters. So I was like, okay. You know, I was starting to feel at that point, like, I think I want an epidural. I never said the word epidural, but I was starting to think like this. I don't want to feel like this anymore. They checked me a few hours later. I'm 6. Okay. That gives me some boost of confidence. Try to go in the hallway. That didn't work. I wanted to be in a cave locked away from everybody. And then a few hours later, I was like, I cannot take this anymore. Like, I feel like I am dying and I need to know that this baby's coming soon. And when she checked me, I was only 4. So I had gone backwards. My cervix had started to swell closed because I was having this uncontrollable urge to push. And that is not the normal course of labor. That is absolutely a dysfunctional labor. At that point, epidural is really the only thing that you can do to get somebody to stop pushing. And so at that point, I was like, give me the needle. I will give the epidural to myself. Like that was not,
which is also not something you can do.
Yes, you cannot do that. But I remember being like, that's it. This is the last straw. And you were so good. You tried to like be like, you can do this. Like, and I was like, nope. I had just like, at that point, like hearing that my cervix was swelling, I was like,
right,
get it. And then Paul, so cute. He tries to like give me a pep talk. And I was like, I have never been more serious in my life. Like, get me an epidural. And part of the reason why I didn't want an epidural was because I didn't want the risks of an epidural. And I didn't want, I wanted to be able to feel my body and move my body in the way I wanted to. But I also knew for me, I did not want to feel numb. I don't like that feeling. Even at the dentist, it like gives me anxiety to be numb. And so I did not want to feel disconnected from that part of my body. And so for me, it was important. Not everybody. I tell people, you know, when I got to the hospital and I was 4 centimeters, I could have asked for an epidural. Like I didn't have to go another 6 hours. I could have asked for an epidural then. It would have been completely reasonable. I could have told the midwife back at 6 o'clock at night when I couldn't eat the rice that I wanted to go to the hospital, even though she said, stay home. Like I could have said, no, I don't feel comfortable and I'm coming in. So people don't have to have that. But what I wanted was to not get an epidural. And so, so at that point, I knew that this is a tool that I needed, and I was right. Once I was numb And the epidural, I was lucky. It worked first try. That doesn't always happen.
We all got a little sleep.
Yep. Everybody took a nap. And when I woke up, I did not like being numb. I hated it, actually. I hated that my legs felt cold and like lead. I hated not being able to move my body, like, because you think you're going to move and then your body doesn't respond. But I was grateful that I had tried everything else in my toolbox, because I didn't have an anxiety attack. I didn't have a panic attack, because I was like, Melissa, remember, this is a tool that you're using to help you because you needed it. And it felt like, okay, yeah, I knew this was going to feel this way, and this isn't what I wanted, but this is what I needed. And so it was good for me personally. So then at this point, my contractions basically went to nothing. They went from contracting every 3 minutes to every 12 minutes. And so the midwife came in, and, we had all taken a several hour nap, at least 2 hours. And a lot of times your contractions will space out after an epidural, and then they'll pick up back again, but mine never did. And so, at this point I had been in labor for like 29, 30 hours. And the midwife was like, it's not unreasonable to start a little bit of PIT. And I was like, yep, please. Cause I would like to have this baby vaginally. Like it was wonderful. The way she approached it wasn't, well, we're going to start Pitocin. It was, we could start Pitocin. She's like, we could break your water, but the baby's still a little high. And if the baby is OT, I want to give the baby space and room to turn their head. So I don't want to break your water. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. Like, thanks for talking about risk, benefits, and alternatives. I would like Pitocin, please. It was very much a decision that I made. And the nurse was wonderful. The protocol that they followed there was evidence-based. She started at 1 milliunit. I think then she went up to 2, and then maybe she went up to 4. But I never went any higher than 4. And she got me into a position with a peanut ball where I was almost entirely on my belly, and the top leg, like if you're thinking about laying on your side and then turning as much onto your belly as you can, and then your top leg being kind of almost like it's going to hang off the bed. She put this peanut ball there. And it was a position that I'm sure you had suggested, or she had even suggested, or the midwife had suggested, but before the epidural, I couldn't tolerate it. It hurt too much. And so being relaxed with the epidural, I could. And so I got into that position. They started some Pitocin, and then all of a sudden, because I'm a labor and delivery nurse, I heard the baby's heartbeat start to go down. Yeah. And so I'm like, Paul, get me some oxygen. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I need the oxygen. The baby's heart rate's going down. He's like, no, you're gonna ring for the nurse. You're not gonna. So he like rings for the nurse, and he's like, come in here quick. My wife wants oxygen. And I was like, shut up. I know what I'm doing. And he's like, no, you don't have to be your own nurse right now. You have to be a patient. And I'm like, you're right. So the baby had a huge decel. And which often happens when your baby goes from a very high station to a very low station. Yeah. So I went from 4 centimeters dilated and a -3, -2. Baby very was so high baby. She didn't want to break my water. So I went from a 4 centimeter dilated cervix to a -2, -3 station to 8 centimeters dilated and a +1, +2 station in one contraction. Again, this whole idea of if I had less patient providers, that wanted me, hey, you've already been in labor for 27 hours. You want to
time for a C-section.
Time for a C-section, right? And so it wasn't that my baby was too big and I was too small. I mean, I had a 6-pound baby, and I can just hear some of the doctors that I've worked with in the past saying like, well, you have a narrow pelvis, and, you only have a 6-pound baby, and your labor is this dysfunctional. I mean, it's just not going to work. Right. But like, that was total BS. Like, the baby's head was crooked when he turned his head. Thank God. I went from 4 to 8 centimeters in one contraction, and a -3 to a +2
appropriate use of an epidural, and then special positioning in order to get your pain controlled so you could relax, let your body relax, and get your body in a position that would facilitate your baby turning.
Also, again, because my midwives were following evidence-based care, so were my nurses, they did not immediately send me to a C-section with that decel. They did appropriate interventions. They gave me oxygen. They gave me IV fluids. They changed my position. They checked my cervix and said, oh, well, no wonder why the baby's heart rate went down. She's now 8. An hour later, I was fully dilated. And 40 minutes after that, I pushed him into my arms. And
we have film of that.
We do. Jeanette, doula extraordinaire, videotaped my birth. And that's another thing, at my second labor.
We could splice it into this episode so we can.
Oh my gosh, that would be so fun. Because I said some really funny things. I remember at one point saying to my mom, "How did you do this 4 times?"
Yep.
And my mom was like, "You forget, honey."
The best line was when a nurse walks by and you're holding the baby already. You had just given birth. He's like freshly on your skin. And you're like, "Who's that? Who's that?" And then the nurse walks in. And of course, it's a friend of yours. And you're like,
Yep.
"Oh, hi." And she's like, "Oh, congratulations. Can I see?" And you look at her and you go, "Your hair looks really good like that."
No, like 2 seconds before I was like, "I can't do this anymore."
Yeah.
You know? And yeah, so it was a really hard labor. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but it was one of the best things I've ever done in my life, and I'm so grateful that I stacked the cards in my favor for the birth experience that I wanted, because you know, if I was less informed, if I was less supported, if I had, more trigger happy, scalpel happy providers that were less tolerant of normal physiological labor, that would have maybe tried to coerce me into an epidural sooner, or into surgery, or an episiotomy, or a vacuum, right? Like, he was 6 pounds, 11 ounces. He was perfectly healthy. He screamed right away. And
As
he
did
was,
you. I
yes,
did it. I
I
did it.
did it. I was so, what's funny is at one point too, like when they realized I was fully, and like it had happened so fast considering how long I had been, 4 centimeters, right? I started crying, and I looked at my husband. I said, "I deserve this. I deserve this after that labor." Like, I just remember being like, yeah. So I mean, it was incredible. It is one of the most things I'm most proud of. And I think for another episode we should talk about my second birth. I think,
Mm-hmm.
because that is a completely different story. It was a completely straightforward labor experience, but it was not a low intervention birth.
Mm-hmm.
And the providers were not supportive of physiological
Because you
labor.
made some
And
interesting decisions.
I did. I
Yeah.
did. And I have to own those decisions. So
Mm.
I am so grateful for your care. Every Christmas, we watch the birth video. And,
What a
and
tradition
it was,
on the
yeah, no,
holiday.
it was amazing. It was, as funny, because, we always talk about the emotional release, that at some point in labor, many people start to
Mm-hmm.
cry. And then as a midwife, as a doula, as a nurse, oh yeah, we're having a baby soon, when they have that emotional release. And for me, I remember I didn't even realize how much this had been weighing on me, but Christmas was happening all around us, and I was in labor,
We had
right?
Christmas music on in your labor too.
We did have Christmas music.
Yeah.
Oh, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, oh my God. It's a boy. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, you're so tiny. Oh, you're so, so tiny. Mom, can you put the hat on? Yeah, sure. That'll keep him nice and warm. Oh, beautiful. Good job. Oh, he's so perfect. Oh, I can't believe I grew him. Oh, Joanna, Mom.
There you are.
Who is that? I don't know. Tell him to come meet my baby. Kira, come meet my baby. Yes, you are. Let me see this baby. Oh my God. His name's Pierce. So beautiful.
Congratulations. You rocked it, my friend. My God.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Oh, congratulations. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you, Kira. Nice to see you.
You did awesome. Yeah, nice to see you. Well, so is your beauty.
It's house, because it's somebody in Worcester. Oh. Your hair looks good like that.
Thank you.
I do remember that. But I remember feeling guilty that my mom was with me and not celebrating Christmas.
Mm.
And so, how silly, right? Like, her
Meanwhile,
granddaughter.
you just gave her like an amazing gift to be there.
Well, that's what she said. So I started crying at one point, and I said, "I'm so sorry." And this is after the epidural, when I finally could like think again. I was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm ruining Christmas." And I'm like sobbing. And she looks at me and she rubs my head and she says, "Melissa, this is the best Christmas present you could ever give me." And I will never forget what I felt like when she said that. And I will never forget how she said it. And it was just what I needed to hear. to let go of trying to control when this baby was coming. Because I was not going to have my baby on Christmas Day, right? I was going to have a baby in January. And that was just the first of many times I had to let go of control as a new parent. But I am so grateful for that experience. And I'm so glad that I was so loved and cared for, not just taken care of, right? Like I was cared for and loved by you and the midwives and my partner. And it was, I mean, my husband didn't even cry like when we got married. Like my husband like never cries, and like he bawled like when Pierce was born. We also didn't know that he was a boy or that he had a penis. I don't know. He has, I didn't know what his gender identity was going to be, but he does believe he is a boy. So, yeah, it was awesome. And so that's my Christmas baby.
That's awesome. And it's, I think, in a way, it's neat that given what you do now, that you had that perspective and that you have your other two births, which were also very different from your first.
Yes.
You know, like sometimes in childbirth education, we joke about, wouldn't it be great if every childbirth educator could have a C-section, a home birth, a birth center birth, an epidural birth, and one with analgesics, like,
yes.
So, but at the same time, those are your own personal experiences and everybody feels those differently too. So it does inform to some degree, but one person's C-section isn't like the next. One person doesn't feel labor like the next. It's so different. So, I'm hoping you're going to have like a bunch more kids so you can see kind of what other experiences.
No way. No how. Never. Done.
Awesome. Well, I love your story and I'm happy that I was part of it. But
as am I.
Sweet. All right. Well, next time, some other random episode, we're going to share the other kids' stories too.
That sounds great.
You all about that.
I hope that all of our listeners have a wonderful, safe, happy holiday season, whatever they celebrate. And thank you for being a listener. I can't believe that we're in December. We're at the end of December, Jeanette. We've been doing this since April.
That's right.
And we're wrapping up our first year of podcasting. Right. It's so exciting.
Woohoo.
Happy New Year, right? What's next to come for us?
Oh, I hope 2021's got to be so much better. That's the plan. Yeah. But we'll see. I know. Happy Christmas. Maybe some people are listening to this while they're in labor on Christmas.
Oh, maybe. And have a Christmas baby.
That's cool to do. All righty. Well, we've got a lot to think about, and we're here for everybody as a community of childbirth educators. We've got doulas that we know we can recommend, and all sorts of other providers and support people so that people can have the birth that they want, feeling loved and adored and supported. Because we like to be your community, because after all, we all have babies in common.
Thank you all. Right. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.